I want to introduce Alex, a winemaker. Alex Kanzler produces just 2,000 cases of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from the Foggy Hills in the southwestern corner of Sonoma County's Russian River Valley. Kanzler Estate Vineyard was one of the first planted in the Sebastopol Hills neighborhood. The 25-year-old vines are organically dry farmed, and synthetic herbicides are avoided. Kanzler grapes have been featured in vineyard designate bottles by other top producers such as Costa Brown, Linmar, and Arista. In fact, the vineyard is the source to over 60 wines rated 90 to 98 points by Wine Spectator. So a man who needs no introduction for his vineyards, for his wines, or himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Alex Kanzler.
That was like the biggest introduction I've ever gotten.
I know, I rehearsed it.
Man, pressure's on now. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Alex. I think I know one or two people and one or two I don't. So welcome. Thanks for joining us here. As Mike said, super small group. I know we're going to have a few more people logging on. But my big kind of house cleaning item to kind of dovetail on what Mike was saying was, please ask questions. Like, I have a bunch of content for you guys. We have a little slideshow with some pictures. We have an online map that we can kind of navigate Sonoma County and the Sebastopol Hills with. I got a bunch of stories, some that are mine, some that are my family. So like plenty to talk about, but this is your guys' presentation. I'm just happy to take it in any direction that you guys want to go. I'm a winemaker, I'm a cork dork. If you guys want to get like granular about cooperages and barrels or phenolic extraction or extended maceration, or super top level about tasting notes or Sonoma County viticulture, specifically Sebastopol Hills, like I'm happy to just take this in any direction that anybody wants to go. So please just know that questions, and I'm happy to take it wherever. But to get us kicked off here, I'm going to share my screen.
One point I just want to jump into, Alex, is that
yeah.
I think you want folks to start drinking the wine, right? Please.
Yeah. Let's what I like to do for that, because we all got more experience with this virtual tasting stuff here. Mike, can you see the screen? We good here? Okay. So I like to start with this photo right here, which doesn't look like much, but this is our very kind of quaint, very basic tasting room, so to speak, on top of the vineyard. It's this very basic pergola with an old slab of wood on top of a couple of wine barrels. And when we do have the opportunity to bring people out to the estate, this is basically the show. So this is a view looking north down the vineyard rows. And so I always like to start with this slide because it kind of puts me in the mood and in the headspace to taste wine. So I'll go ahead and cheers the screen here, even though I'm sharing my screen and you guys can't see me. Hopefully some of y'all are drinking with a friend or a family member there in your home, maybe in a different circumstances, more people, but still limiting gatherings to a point. But this is my space to taste wine at the Kanzler Estate. So I always like to start with this picture. I'll move through the slideshow a little bit here. I don't know how familiar everybody is with Kanzler, so I'll give a little bit of family background. But pretty quick, I might even jump ahead a few slides to get into the wine, because I do want you guys tasting the wine. I want you guys kind of pondering it, thinking about your tasting notes. And that is, this wine, our 2017 Estate Reserve, is going to kind of, in some ways be the centerpiece of what we're doing today. So think about that wine, and I'll tell a little story about the family here. So this is most of my family. This is my wife, Brianna here, myself, my mom, and my dad. This is Huck and Finn, who are out wreaking havoc right now, probably cleaning up some gopher holes out there. And then we threw the picture of my parents and my sister here in the wedding dress, and Alex looking quite a bit younger. And this picture right here kind of goes with this bottle of wine right here. And we like to show this picture because when my parents planted this vineyard in 1996, it was a decrepit, old, non-producing apple orchard. I'll go back to my screen right here. We'll jump back into the slideshow. It was like a decrepit, old, non-producing apple orchard. You couldn't pay somebody to take the apples that were coming off this property. So my dad, who was kind of the new guy in town, went and did something smart, which was go knock on the neighbor's door. And our neighbors just to the south of us are a family named the Kozlowskis, and they're like fourth generation Sonoma County farmers. grape farmers, apple farmers, berry farmers. They have a big like specialty foods company. They make like pies, jams, marinades, chutneys. Like they have a farm store out in Forestville. Pies are kind of the famous thing when you see the Kozlowski name out there. But anyway, they're like true blue farmers. And in a bit of irony, my dad went and knocked on Perry Kozlowski's door, and Perry, who's got apples across the way from us, Perry the apple farmer told my dad to plant grapes. So he said something to the extent of, you can grow apples in like 40 states in this country, and you can grow premium wine grapes a handful of places in the world. If I were you, I'd plant grapes. And so that's kind of what got my dad down the path of Pinot Noir, which, as Mike said at the beginning, you know, we're in Russian River Valley. We're at the very southwestern corner of it. We'll show this on the map later, but there were not a lot of vineyards out here. You know, the Santa Barbara equivalent to Sebastopol Hills in my mind is like that far western corner of Santa Rita Hills. You know, the closer you get to the ocean here, just like in Santa Barbara, the cooler it is, the more fog there is, the more wind there is. It's typically a little bit drier depending on your elevation and your exposure. So, you know, rough and tumble, but that's kind of what brings out the best in Pinot Noir. So that's what kind of got us going. And then to jump back into the slideshow here, this bottle of wine, with the kind of funky home done label here all the way on the left. This was a bottle of wine that my dad and our first winemaker Greg made for my sister's wedding. So the wedding was right here in the backyard. They made this kind of homemade Pinot Noir for the wedding party. My sister got married fairly young, in like her early 20s. I think she was 24 and my brother-in-law was 25. So it was like a big party. And we woke up the next morning, tent still in the backyard, everybody's groggy eyed. And I remember looking around, I'm like 18 at the time, and like the kegs are half full. We have all this leftover liquor, and my brother-in-law's a Scotsman. So like we had scotch and I don't know, margaritas, whatever, all this leftover beer, all this leftover liquor, and all the Pinot Noir's gone. The wedding party drank all the red wine. So we're like, oh, well, you know, that went well. Maybe we should do this. Consequently, or also at the same time, we had started selling fruit to Koster Brown. Her wedding was in 2004, and our first year selling to Koster Brown was 2002. And that was that kind of, you know, early mid 2000s meteoric rise of New World Pinot Noir. You know, people call it the sideways effect. Up here, you know, Koster Brown was definitely the lead horse in that charge as far as kind of a new school, new kid on the block, you know, New World style Pinot Noir that really took off with the mailing list model and all that. And we were lucky enough to be a part of that. You know, we like to think that Kanzler played a little role in Koster Brown's success with the Vineyard Designate, and they certainly paved the way for us, and we were able to stand on their shoulders with some name recognition. So that's kind of the quick background on the family. I do want to, as promised, kind of jump ahead a few slides and discuss this wine, and then we can kind of backtrack a little bit into more like viticulture, winemaking, stuff like that. But because you guys have this wine in front of you, and it's sort of what we're here to discuss, I'm just going to jump ahead a few slides to our 2017 Estate Reserve. So we call it Estate Reserve because it's our estate. And this is kind of the wine in our portfolio that punches on the same level as the Koster Brown or the Linmar or the Arista or any of the other wineries that we've sold fruit to in the past that then, you know, do the Vineyard Designate bottling. So as a winemaker, the big kind of, I won't say stylistic, but the big kind of winemaking strategy that we take with this wine is there's no estate reserve block in the vineyard. I don't have like an acre and a half or 2 acres out of the 15 or whatever set aside that we farm better or that we pay closer attention to or that we use different oak on that's for the estate reserve. We try to farm the entire vineyard to the best of our ability. We try to pick the fruit as accurately and timely as possible. We try to put the best oak on it. We try to use the right amount of whole cluster. And then the estate reserve develops over the course of the year just by tasting. And we try to create a wine that will be age-worthy and a wine that really reflects not only the vineyard, but that vintage. It's probably a little bit more vintage variation than, you know, our Russian River, which is a blend and, you know, is meant to be a little bit more friendly on the younger side of things. The Estate Reserve is going to be a little bit riper, juicier, New World in a warm vintage. It's going to be a little bit more like austere and elegant and aromatic in a cool vintage. And we're comfortable, you know, allowing that to come forward. And so if you taste like a history of our wines, you'll definitely see the common thread that's woven through all of these vintages of Estate Reserve, but you do taste the vintage in there. And when I'm blending these, it's not even like, oh, I got to get the best barrels, the sexiest barrels, the fruitiest barrels, the most bodacious barrels. It's like, what were the most 2017-ish barrels in the 2017? And let's put those together, still keeping in mind, obviously, the tenets of winemaking, you know, being balanced. You need your acid and your tannin, your oak, your aromatics, you know, your flavor profiles, your textures, all that kind of has to work. But yeah, we're not going for like the most over the top or in some ways obvious wine. And it's funny, sometimes, you know, some people put a lot of stock in critics, some people don't. We submit our scores, and sometimes the Russian River scores higher than the Estate Reserve, because in some ways the Russian River is a little bit more like, you know, approachable, especially when the critics are tasting the wines within, you know, 6 months of release or whatever. But there's usually like an inflection point, and even like our customers who know the wines well, people will be like, oh, first like 2, 3, 4 years, oh, I prefer the Russian River. I prefer the Russian River. Yeah, I think the Russian River is drinking a little better right now. And then at like year 4 or 5, there's like an inflection point, and people get into that Estate Reserve, and people are like, oh yeah, the Russian River is good, but like that estate's really coming into its own. And so we craft the wine with that in mind a little bit. Otherwise, I mean, all of this is available on our website. There's some winemaking, you know, nuts and bolts on here as far as the clonal selections, pH, alcohol. We don't find the wines, we don't filter the wines. The new oak, as you can see here, is not light. It's about 60%, but we use a 100% French oak, all very tight grain, kind of medium plus toast. The oak, I get it in this wine, but the oak in all of our wines, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, is always meant to play a complementary role. It's always meant to be kind of, you know, fleshing out the wine and, you know, kind of in the background. It should never be in the driver's seat. And I think we typically accomplish that in most of our wines. And so that's kind of the nuts and bolts on the tasting notes, or kind of how we've constructed this wine. So I'm happy to sort of jump back into the vineyard stuff. Now, Mike, you think I should just keep cruising here?
Yeah, I think you're nailing it. I'm just really enjoying this wine. I know we're going to talk about it here a little bit more. So yeah, fire away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sipping on it a little bit here. I am drinking out of the handy dandy decanter, and I'm pretty sure we put that in kind of the email or the contacts, you know, even a 17 with a couple years of age on it. This has been decanting for about 4 hours, with all those kind of notes that I said about age worthiness and whatnot. Decanting the wine at this stage in its life is definitely going to help open it up a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up the decanting and making age-worthy wine. Regina asks, you know, how do you make an age-worthy wine? You know, what's your practice there? I know that's a tricky question, but
yeah, it is. But it's a good question. You know, from like a nuts and bolts winemaking side of things, I mean, generally you can do strategies that will make the wine more reductive. And reductive versus oxidative in kind of a winemaking sense means how resilient is the wine to oxygen, because oxygen is what ages your wine, right? It's why we swirl our glass. Flinging wine. It's why we swirl our glass. It's why we use a decanter. It's why premium wines are aged in oak barrels, because they're semi-porous. It's why most wines are closed with a cork, because oxygen can penetrate the cork. So the age-worthiness of a wine has a lot to do with how resilient it is to oxygen. A lot of Pinot Noirs are less resilient to oxygen than, say, like a Cabernet, because one of the things that protect us against oxygen are tannins. So red wines, well, any wine, but red wines in particular that have high tannin loads tend to be more age-worthy at the get-go. That's why Cabernet ages for a really long time. Syrah, Petit Syrah, some of the Italian varietals, Nebbiolo, can age for a really long time. With Pinot Noir, we don't have as many of those grape tannins because it's a thin-skinned grape, and that's why we love Pinot Noir, because it's elegant and juicy and berry-driven, but it doesn't have that big kind of robust tannin. So one thing that we use to build tannins in the wine and make it more age-worthy are the oak, because the oak tannins will contribute to it. And in Pinot Noir specifically, you do it with other varietals, but I'd say principally in Pinot Noir, we do whole cluster fermentation. So what that means is, instead of destemming the grapes when they come into the winery and kind of getting rid of the clusters and just keeping your berries, your seeds, your skin, and your juice, we actually it'll be a whole cluster of grapes not quite like you would see in a grocery store because the cluster architecture is different, but we throw the whole cluster in there and ferment the grapes with the clusters on it. It's kind of a high risk, high reward thing, because if you think about like Arachis, if you think about really like any type of green plant vegetal material that fruit would grow on, like it definitely has the ability to be bitter or grassy, and like a Pinot Noir whole cluster lot that's kind of gone wrong will smell like snow peas, cut grass, like asparagus, artichoke leaf. So like you run the risk of it being green, but you can also, if kind of done correctly, you can add a lot of tannin into the wine that can really make it age worthy and kind of give you a frame, and you can add in some really neat aromatics. Still on kind of the herbal side, but I don't think nobody really wants snow peas or cut grass or asparagus. But especially in Pinot Noir, we like mushrooms, we like forest floor, we like what the French would call like sous-bois, that type of like earthy or shrubby kind of herbalness that we get in a lot of wines. I think in a lot of New World wines up and down California, but especially in the cooler regions of like West Sonoma County, we get a lot of like warm spices. And when I say warm spices, I'm thinking stuff in like the clove or nutmeg or cardamom kind of range of things, Chinese 5-spice. Some of that comes from the grapes, some of that comes to the whole cluster. So then there's other winemaking stuff that we do, and a lot of it just has to do with being kind of giving the wine oxygen at the right time, specifically when it's super young, and then protecting it from oxygen over time. So like with Pinot Noir, we never rack it until it goes to bottle, which means with Cabernet, you oftentimes will take all the wine out of the barrel, put it up into a tank, and then put it back down in the barrel, and splashing it pretty aggressively oftentimes because you're trying to get oxygen into that Cabernet, because you actually need the oxygen to sort of break down those tannins. With Pinot, we do the opposite. We put it in barrel once, kind of right out of the press, and then we just leave it there. So it's a combination of winemaking strategies, and then also what comes in with the fruit as far as tannin goes. And then there's little things you do. We switched to a different enclosure this year. We use now it's 100% cork enclosure, but it's kind of a composite cork called DM. And this thing's great because it's 100% cork, which we know and love. It's 0% TCA guaranteed, which nobody likes a cork bottle, but then the density of the cork is guaranteed. People might be familiar with the phrase, with aged wines, there's no good wines, there's only good bottles. And a lot of that bottle variation with an aged wine can come from the cork, specifically the density of it. If you have a loose, not very dense cork, it's going to get oxygen into the bottle a lot faster. If you have a very dense cork, that aging process is going to be slower. So that's the great thing about the DMs, is they're all consistent with a density standpoint. So we can, expect that all the wines, literally the individual bottles out in the world, should age at a similar rate. So there's definitely, little stuff like packaging can really protect the wine in the long run also. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, acid plays a big role too. I mean, right? I mean,
yeah,
ageability, and you have such great acid out there.
Yeah, I kind of got hyper focused on tannin there, but yeah, acid plays a huge role as well. And I mean, this is, let's use a food analogy. Everybody knows that like if you drip a little lemon juice on like an apple or something, it'll prevent it from browning. Acid is kind of a natural preservative. It's any of your acidic foods that are in your refrigerator tend to last a lot longer. Like you can have a jar of pickles in your fridge kind of forever, right? The pH is super low. The acid's a natural preservative. Obviously, the acid in wine doesn't fluctuate as much as like your jar of pickles versus, I don't know what goes bad fast, your piece of fish or whatever that's going to turn over pretty quickly. But yeah, acid plays a huge role in wine as well. And, typically the lower pH, which means higher acid, the more acidic a wine is, can definitely play a role in its age-worthiness as well. That being said, wines that are super acid reliant for their structure, if that acid breaks down, which it does over time, if the wine is super reliant on acid for its drinkability for whatever reason, once the acid goes away, the wine can fall apart pretty quickly. And sometimes you see that with white wines, like a Sauvignon Blancs are typically very acidic. They don't typically age as long, but there's kind of some fruit freshness stuff as well that kind of plays a role there. So let me jump back into the slideshow a little bit. I do want to hit on viticulture just as we kind of keep moving here. This is like the direct aerial of the vineyard. So not as much to see here. I just kind of like to show the house kind of right in the middle of the vineyard.
A great shot.
All the like decrepit apple orchard all around, all got replaced with vines. This is kind of a true north-south orientation. This is the house that I grew up in. The wedding was like in the middle of this lawn right here. The pergola is out right here. And we actually rent this house out now as a farm stay. So side note, if you guys are considering visiting Russian River Valley, it's a 4-bed, 4.5 bath farm stay with the pool and the hot tub and the fire pit and the whole 9 yards. So that's fun. But then I like to show this picture. I can scroll over here as well. This is just a really cool shot taken by drone of sort of the greater Sebastopol Hills. So Kanzler is right here. We're kind of looking due west. This is a sunset shot, you know, ocean's out here. This is this kind of rectangle over here is Kanzler. This spine right here with the trees and the houses is Pleasant Hill. These are some more east slope facing vineyards off of Pleasant Hill. But I show these two pictures to kind of display the Sebastopol Hills really are, you know, it's not the Côte d'Or in Burgundy. It's not like one, oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. It's not like one contiguous hillside or anything like that. And it's not a plains area either. It's this series of like undulating hills. So our site is kind of on the bottom slope of an kind of the bottom part of an eastward facing hill. And I think Kanzler is kind of a warm site and a cool area. We're in this little like banana belt section of Sebastopol Hills, and we're a little protected. We're like pure east facing, which is great for a lot of reasons, especially with leaf pulling. But because we're kind of tucked down on this hill and in this almost little valley, like the fog kind of like swirls around us. And sometimes we even get this effect where like the fog comes in from the south, from the Petaluma Gap, but it will like kind of almost like encircle us and then like backfill. It doesn't like come right in and hit us because we're down lower in elevation. I have another site maybe 2 miles south of here that's the opposite. It's right on the crown of the hill and it is right in the path of the Petaluma Gap. The wind picks up there at like 2 o'clock and like the fog is on it like that. And that's a cool site and a cool area. So Sebastopol Hills really has all these kind of different undulations, higher elevation sites, lower elevation sites, all different slope aspects. Probably the most unifying character of our little neighborhood here is the soil. It's almost all gold rich sandy loam soil here, which is kind of the preferred soil to grow both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I'd argue in a lot of parts of California, Gold Ridge has a lot of advantages as far as its natural pH, as far as its nutrient load, which is low, which is what we like for wine grapes, as far as its ability to drain. It's just a really nice soil to work with, especially for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's kind of powdery and sandy on the top. It usually has a little bit of clay underneath. And then we're on top of an old inland sea formation called Wilson Grove. So like you go deep enough and you hit seashells here, and there's other parts where it's been uplifted a little bit and you'll see like little seashells in the soil, even though we're, you know, a solid 9 miles from the Pacific at this point, because the whole kind of Santa Rosa Plains used to be an inland sea. And as we're kind of talking about this stuff, let's see, jump into the screen share. So this is Sonoma County, Russian River Valley, Green Valley. We're jumping ahead a little bit here, but this is kind of the zoom in of Russian River Valley. So this is the border of the AVA. And this kind of, as I mentioned, this southwest corner down here is Sebastopol Hills. So down here is kind of the Petaluma Gap. To the west is Sonoma Coast, to the east is Napa, and to the north is like Dry Creek Valley and Alexander Valley, which is more like Zinfandel and Cabernet area. And this kind of area down here sort of gets the wind first. And I think actually the best way to talk about this, I'm still screen sharing here. So I'm gonna pull up my Every Vine map here and we're gonna zoom out a little bit. This is a really cool Google Earth plugin for you cork dorks at home. If you wanna just like go vineyard exploring with a really neat tool online, it's just everyvine.com. You can see it up here. Yeah. So let me zoom out here a little bit so you can see the coast. San Francisco, Oakland, the San Francisco Bay right there, all the stuff kind of outlined in orange is our primary wine growing regions. And let me just start zooming back in here because I'm basically centered over Kanzler. Sonoma County is obviously north of the Golden Gate. So if we go down a little bit here, Golden Gate Bridge is right there in downtown San Francisco, and the 101 corridor is kind of winding up through here. Actually, that's 101 right there. And then kind of the first feature to see here, and I'll zoom in, is the Petaluma Gap. And the Petaluma Gap is now an AVA, but it's a geographical feature. You can see all this this is Google Earth. So you can literally see these are trees and hills up here, and all this kind of brown right here is a break in the hills. And this is where most of the weather comes from. So we don't kind of get a direct West Coast influence because we're protected by all these kind of hills right here. It kind of typically comes in from the south through the Petaluma Gap and then filters south to north in the Russian River Valley, which if we jump back into our screen right here, that's why kind of Sebastopol Hills in the southwest is a little bit cooler than say the eastern hills up north kind of into Healdsburg. And again, you're going north here, you're getting Alexander Dry Creek Valley into our bigger red territory. Down here in Sebastopol Hills, you're really in Pinot and Chardonnay land. So just to kind of finish out our every vine path here, you got the Petaluma Gap, which is all the grasslands down here. Then you see the towns of Occidental and Freestone. Here's downtown Sebastopol. And then we'll get into kind of the vineyard level of things pretty quick here. Keep massaging this. Now we're kind of hovered right over Sebastopol Hills. And here's Kanzler right here, if it's gonna populate for me. So here's our little vineyard right here, about 15 planted acres of Pinot Noir. And you can see there's not a huge density of plantings. You know, there's still apples in this neck of the woods. There's still a lot of, there's no real timber down here, but there's still some grazing lands, especially directly south of us. But if you start going north of this, and I'm not going to mess around here too long because it's taken a long time to load, but you would get a lot more density of plantings if I started like scrolling up too far, and you get more into the heart of Green Valley, and the vineyards get bigger and the plantings get a little bit more dense. And Sebastopol Hills is not quite developed to that same level. So that was kind of the lay of the land, which I like to do. And I especially like to talk about the neighborhoods a little bit, because that's a really nice tool to understand Russian River Valley. It's a pretty big AVA. We do a lot of things well. I mean, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are still kind of the headliners in Russian River Valley, but there's great Zinfandel, there's great Sauvignon Blanc, there's great Syrah. You go up really to the northern part near, Alexander Valley, and you can start ripening Cabernet, when you get to the far northern parts of the AVA. So the neighborhoods are just a way to sort of break down Russian River a little bit and understand some of the nuances of the wines that come from an individual region. So Sebastopol Hills is not an official AVA. You'll never see like Sebastopol Hills on a bottle the same way you see Russian River Valley or Sonoma Coast or Santa Rita Hills, but kind of, locally amongst the farmers and the winemakers. And we're kind of hoping to bring it out into the world a little bit, talking about the neighborhoods, Sebastopol Hills, Laguna Ridge, Middle Reach, et cetera, is a really neat way to understand Russian River Valley. So I'm going to stop and take a sip of wine. All right. Mike, did you want to jump into questions a little bit?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you bring up an interesting point. And I'm going to get to Wayne's and Lori's questions here in a second. But, you talk about the neighborhoods. I think that's something really important that as you said, that for the longest time, it's just sort of been what you guys all know up there, and like cork dorks like myself know. But you guys are kind of making an effort to sort of, make distinctions in the Russian River Valley.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And it's something that I've had the opportunity to be involved with. It started like way before me, some of the kind of Russian River sages up here, Rod Berglund at Joseph Swan, Mike Sullivan at Benovia. I mean, it started even earlier with that, with the Duttons, Sarah Lee Cundy. But, as you said, Mike, people who grow grapes around here, like we know that grapes grown in Sebastopol ripen differently, show different characteristics than, grapes grown closer to Healdsburg or Forestville. Like, Kanzler's a lot different than Rocchioli. They're not that far away, but there's a lot of difference there. But we're all Russian River Valley. So like, how do we start discussing these nuances? And nobody wants to break up the AVA. You got to get the federal government involved in that. And, you don't want to Russian River Valley still has good cachet in the industry and people know it. It's got a good brand. So nobody wants to like toss Russian River Valley to the side to try to do these smaller AVAs.
Right.
So we kind of came up with the idea of just neighborhoods, to start discussing these areas. And, that's kind of what people called them anyway. The really cool thing that we've been able to accomplish, though, is we actually took the wine samples to UC Davis and did a study of kind of early, I'm just bringing this up as we're talking about neighborhoods here. We took kind of very recently barreled down neutral oak Pinot Noir samples to UC Davis and did an elemental fingerprint analysis on them. And basically what they were able to tell us was that the wines from within a neighborhood are consistent and the neighborhoods themselves are distinct, which kind of just proved what we knew already. We know wines show different characteristics, but is that winemaking style? Is it something else? So being able to tie the wines back to the neighborhood from quite literally an elemental standpoint, they can go in and say what level of, biologically active element is in this wine compared to its peers. And they found consistency within the neighborhoods, and then the neighborhoods were distinct from each other. So it kind of gave a scientific foundation to what our more organoleptic observations were. And this is the map we came up with. And I think it's pretty good. And the thing that jumps out to me and what was really sort of crucial was that besides Green Valley, which is a hard line because it's a legal AVA,
right,
everything else kind of fades and blends. Again, getting back to not wanting to create new AVAs, we're not trying to draw lines on a map, and this is still an exploration. So we know that this is Laguna Ridge, más o menos, right? We know that this is Santa Rosa Plains, more or less. But if somebody has a vineyard right here, I'm not going to tell them that they're in Sebastopol Hills or not, or that they're in Santa Rosa Plains or not. That's more for the customers and the winemakers and the wines to decide. So it's an exploration, and it's kind of a way to break down the AVA, and it's really, really neat. And ultimately, a lot of this is done through Russian River Valley wine growers. Ultimately, we are a marketing organization. So at the end of the day, we don't want people to be like, oh, I have a great collection of Russian River wines from, 3 different wineries. We're like, well, no, you need to have 3 wineries in Sebastopol Hills, and then 3 in Santa Rosa Plains, and then
right.
3 in Hills. I want to be like, you guys go to a restaurant and like, the Burgundy list on the wine list is that thick because they have 4 dozen wines from every single village. And then you get to the Russian River list and it's like 1 page long. It's like, no, we need dozens of wines per neighborhood. All right, let's play fair.
I love it. Well, that's actually sort of leads into a question from, it's from Regina. She was saying that this wine, your 2017 that we're all drinking, she says it looks and, tastes a little bit more dense than other Russian River wines she's tasted. And she's wondering if like the Kanzler estate is specific, or is this your style as a winemaker, or is this, a true reflection, I think, of your terroir? If I might editorialize, Regina.
Yeah. Kind of all of the above. And I will reference back to the comment I made earlier about the wines being pretty vintage specific. 17 was a warmer vintage. We had a big heat wave right around Labor Day. We had good ripening that year. It was kind of a medium minus crop load, and crop load doesn't equal quality or density, but there's definitely a correlation between the lower ripening, the lower yielding your vineyard is, the more density of flavors you're going to have. And then I would definitely say that the Kanzler winemaking program and our house style does skew a little bit more on like a bigger, denser side of things. We're not the full throttle, kind of higher alcohol, 100% fruit driven type of wine. We're definitely not the super elegant, light in color, very aromatically driven. I do like to kind of try to incorporate the best of both worlds. But if I had to be on one side of the median or the other, we're definitely on the bigger side of things. So I think you're seeing the vintage here too, and you're seeing the concentration of fruit off this site. You're seeing that 60% new oak profile. You're seeing, I think it's 14% whole cluster on this. We kind of discussed that tannin load that comes with the whole cluster, and that gives you density and fleshiness to the wine as well. And so, I think the wine accurately represents the vineyard, the winery, and the vintage in all that sense.
It's also a little young for you, especially for 2017, I would think, right? 2017's got some legs on it. If you could lay this down.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's definitely part of how we construct the wine, as we've discussed already. But I feel very strongly in the wines that I make and in the wines that I buy and in the wines that I collect. Like, nobody wants to pay around $80 for a bottle of wine and have a short drinking window. Wines of on this tier and of this quality, for all the peers, they should have a slow and steady come up, and then they should have a really long drinking plateau. You don't want to be like, I have to drink this wine at year 7 because then it falls apart at year 8, or, you want to give people a really long kind of peak drinking window, and then it should have an even slower decline than it did on the way up. We don't want to have a wine that falls off a cliff, at year 8 or year 9. And so right now we see good drinkability on our wines, up to 8 or 10 years, like no problem, like not even breaking a sweat, 8 or 10 years. And then we've had wines, go 15 years, no problem. Like our favorite aged wine until about a year ago was our 2006. So that was about 14 years. And we thought the 6 was like right there, up at 14 years. And so we were really, really proud of that. And probably our best, our go-to example of an aged Kanzler wine right now that, like, if we take it out to a dinner or whatever, is the 2010 was showing really, really good in the last 6 months. But then, with a big decant, and especially if you like the wine a little bit denser and fruitier and younger, decant it. But I think a lot of people, especially if they like kind of New World California style Pinots, this would probably, strike a good chord for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I'll echo Regina's follow-up question that it's delicious. So there you have it.
Well, thank you. It goes pretty good with I got the biscuits and the mustard and a little bit of cheese in front of me, and the mustard's got some pop to it. But I wanted to just mention the little food pairing that we sent out to it, especially our Big Bottom Market biscuit mix. This is made down the road in Guerneville, California, which, Sebastopol is the western part of Sonoma County, but Guerneville is really the western part of Sonoma County, out by the Russian River itself, and a neat little town. If anybody's ever in the area, it's a little too far out for grape growing, but there's a redwood preserve there that's got like some 300-foot tall trees that are really, really accessible on like a 3/4 mile hike. So that's another cool thing about Sonoma County. We have a lot of grapes, but we still have some mixed ag, and we have redwoods, and we have the ocean. So it's a really neat place to visit.
Yeah. So did you want to continue on with some of your slides, or?
Sure.
Definitely got some questions stacking up. No pressure though.
Yeah, let me see what I got here. I'm in my screen share, right? So yeah, we kind of went over neighborhoods a little bit. Let me kind of get big screened here. I just kind of have some more vineyard shots that sort of foggy mornings, right? This is the obligatory foggy Pinot Noir picture in California, which I think we all have, and plays such a role, as a moderating effect to grow Pinot Noir anywhere near the coast in California, from Mendocino all the way down. Gold Ridge soil, very, very wet in the winter. Shout out to Eric Neal. This is our vineyard manager. I'm pretty sure he's the Marlboro man. I think Philip Morris saw Eric at a gas station sometime and was like, that's our guy. Really cool, salt of the earth, old school farmer. Eric planted our vineyard in 1996, and we've been working with him ever since. So amazing continuity of farming in the vineyard. And Eric and I work very closely, and he's got the crew and the equipment that really makes it happen here. Winery shots. This is actually a Walker Station, just doing some fruit thinning demonstrations there before the crew comes in. Yeah, just kind of some action shots. And I think what we like to show here is, we're a very small team. There's about 4 of us working full time, and production is my baby. So it's all hands on deck, and we do not kind of contract out a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm a hands-on winemaker. I drive forklifts, I deliver bins, I do punch downs. We're really proud of the fact that we're a family operation with a small support team, and we do a lot of things in-house. So yeah, I guess it's more Alex getting dirty in the winery pictures.
Nice.
Yeah, and some blending stuff. So, just to get back to the Estate Reserve a little bit, The way that the wine's constructed, again, we don't predetermine an estate reserve block in the vineyard. So for me, it really is about visiting the wines in depth several times a year. We top every 3 weeks and do analysis every 3 weeks, and I'm tasting the wines as like lots every 3 weeks. So we're keeping a close eye on just for quality control. But about 4 times a year, lay out every single barrel and go through and taste and make notes on every single barrel individually. We do it usually in April and usually in August, and then right around Thanksgiving is kind of the final blend. And to build that estate reserve wine, I think in the 17, we either did 10 barrels or 12 barrels. The base of the wine is always, I go back into the notes of those 3 tastings, and it's like, okay, what handful of barrels had all like the smiley faces and the yummies and the exclamation points and all the tasting notes. And there's usually, maybe I get halfway there. There's like 6 barrels that I'm like, okay, this is the core, like this is what's speaking to this vintage. So in the lab or, on the bench, like let's blend those six barrels together and then taste that and see what we got. We don't taste out of the bottle, we taste out of the glass, but you kind of get that base. And then from there, it's like, okay, now what's the wine missing? Like this is a really great wine, but it needs more oak. It needs more whole cluster. It needs more acid. It needs more of a fruit character. It needs to be a little bit more supple and sumptuous. No, it needs a little bit more stuffing and tannin. So then we kind of build the wine up from there. And I already have like that nice big notebook of tasting notes. So I know, I need some more acid in this wine. Oh, I know this lot that came from this part of the vineyard had a really low pH and a really, linear kind of strong acid profile. Well, let's blend in 2 of those barrels and see what that does to the wine. And so the wine is kind of done in stages like that, and we just build it up to what the final blend ends up being. And it's a really fun way to make wine. It's probably a little bit more labor intensive, and you do get a little bit more vintage variation that way. But it's fun, and that's kind of what we've designed it to be anyway.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point from Anne about, what percentage of clones and how you're thinking about which clones go into it. And it seems like each vintage is going to be different based on, what you get into the cellar eventually. But she wants to know about how you break up the clones and how you think about those.
Yeah, really great question. And this is a nice slide to at least talk about this wine. So here in the 2017, it's 50% Pommard, 38,667, 12% 115. The vineyard itself, the way that it's planted, it's about 50% 667, and then about 25% Pommard and 115. I kind of think of those lines as like the highs, those clones as the highs, the mids, and the low notes. To me, the 667 is kind of the high notes. 667 can be really, to me, it can be very aromatic and have a lot of front of mouth pop, be like really like fruity and kind of unctuous, but then it tends to kind of drop off as it goes back through your palate. The Pommard is the base note, like it's got a lot of structure, can be a little bit denser, a little bit more tannic, takes longer to ripen. That's kind of the frame that the wine can sit on. And then the 115 is somewhere in the middle. But as we're constructing the wine, as I've been saying all along, we're seeing what shows the best in that year. In that 2017, as that slide just displayed, the Pommard was definitely the highlight. It's only 25% of the vineyard, but it made up 50% of the blend. I would argue at this point that of the 3 clones, the Pommard has the highest standalone potential. I'd be very hesitant. There are winemakers that do it, and I won't knock it, but I personally would be very hesitant to make a bottle of Pinot Noir that was 100% 667 or 100% 115. It's totally been done, and I've had great wines that have done that. I think it's a pretty narrow needle to thread. The Pommard to me just has the potential to be a lot more complete and a lot more standalone. It's a really neat clone. Some people don't like it because it can be harder to ripen. It definitely has the bigger, looser cluster architecture, typically thicker skins, typically later ripening, typically not as conducive to whole cluster. It'll tend to try to do that snow pea cut grass thing if you do too much whole cluster on it. But done right and on the right site, it definitely has the highest ceiling as a standalone clone. So that was a really long way of saying, we just got to blend it. We got to taste the barrels and we got to do the blending trials coming out of growing the grapes as best we can. And on this site here, it's only it's only about 14.5 acres, and it's on a very contiguous east-facing slope, and only about probably 75 feet of elevation drop from row 1 to row 126. But sometimes it is not uncommon to be 2 to 3 weeks from first pick to last pick here. And that's due to, 667 on 1103 rootstock at the very top, and Pomard on 10114 rootstock at the very, very bottom. And, the cold air sits at the bottom. The feet are a little bit wetter at the bottom, especially in the spring. So those vines get off to a little bit later of a start. And yeah, we'll be at 23.5 bricks, sniffing around a pick date up there at the top, and the bottom's like trying to finish veraison. It can be really, really dramatic just in a single growing season. Let me make sure I don't have any more slides. Where was I at there? All right. Nice shot of the vineyard house. I think I already did my farm stay shout outs. If you guys are coming to Sonoma County, you can find it on our website or also on Airbnb. And this is my wonderful wife, Brianna's email address. Brianna is our consumer sales manager. She likes to say she makes the wine, or excuse me, I make the wine, she sells the wine. So we got a nice team going that way. And she is the hostess with the mostest. So don't hesitate to reach out to Brianna. It's been fun for me because it was always, my mom was far and away the most popular Kanzler. It was like Mama Kanzler was like way up here with the people. And then like my dad and I were somewhere down here. Now Brianna, my wife, and my mom are kind of like vying for who the most popular Kanzler is. And they both have a pretty sparkling reputation. My dad and I are still like muddling around in the middle somewhere. But yeah, Bri hosts our tastings, manages our wine club, hosts all of our allocations and our mailing list. Basically all of our direct consumer service is her realm. And so that's really a treat to get to work with family. And we're kind of the next generation here trying to move the ball forward here on the family estate. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few. I'm just starting off from the earliest one. And when you're talking about reduction, Wayne just wants to know more about that term. I think it's a good maybe thing to talk about what reductiveness is. I don't think that your wines are reductive. I don't think anyone does, but just that note, that general sort of wine knowledge note of what reductiveness is.
Well, next time for World of Chardonnay, we'll talk reduction a little bit more because our Chardonnay is a little reductive, and it's actually something I like a little bit more in white wines. So I'm not the right person to get too deep into chemistry or organic chemistry, but I mean, reductiveness in general just kind of means a lack of oxygen. The upshot and the takeaway for winemaking is it can lead to a series of characteristics that I typically pick up mostly on aromatics. It can play a role in texture and mouthfeel as well, but a big role in aromatics. So there's kind of good parts of reduction, which means, again, also think of reduction as like your resiliency to oxygen. So a wine that is reductive has either chewed through all of its oxygen or it's not taking in oxygen. It's going to age really slowly, and it can have that reductive character, which when it's really dramatic, it usually creates a series of compounds that are under the umbrella of mercaptans. And so it can be like, when it's really bad, like baby diaper, like sulfide, like farty, or like burnt onions, burnt rubber, that like really kind of sharp, chemically sulfide, mercaptan-y type of thing. That's like the hallmark of reduction. And typically, like if we're concerned about reduction in the winery during the aging of the wine, we'll taste the lees first, all kind of the solid material at the bottom of the barrel, and the lees will go reductive first. And so if you get a lot of strong, bitter, burnt oniony, like burnt, like road tar type of stuff in the lees, there's a chance that it can kind of come out into the wine. So those are kind of like what you would look for. Sometimes a matchstick. And then other things can kind of like play around the edges there. Like a lot of heavy oak can sometimes show up as reduction. If a wine has recently been sulfured, if it's had sulfites added to it like really recently in the winery, and then you dip right back into it, it can be reductive. And then oxidative, like let's just kind of focus on, I guess, the organoleptic side of thing. Oxidative means the wine's kind of gotten a lot of oxygen into it, typically over a fair period of time. And the key oxidative character, or what my key like lead indicator is, like a sherry type character to it, almondy. And it can get into like the bitter sort of like rotten fruit side of things. Like if you leave that slice of apple out on your counter all day and it turns brown, and then you take a bite of it, that kind of like brown skinny thing, it's kind of like nutty. It's not like rotten or fermenting or anything like that, but it's got that kind of bitter nuttiness to it. That's more of an oxidative characteristic. And I prefer reduction in white wines a lot more, and it can help you build texture. And white wines have a tendency to age a little too quickly, so reductive character in white wines can be good. In Pinot Noir, not so much. But just when you're at home, if you ever have a wine, you're like, this smells like road tar or baby diaper or burnt matches or whatever, get your handy dandy decanter out, because the oxygen exposure is what's going to allow that reduction to blow off. So you can kind of treat reduction even at home by introducing oxygen. All right, what else we got in the Q&A?
Yeah, so I know you talked about the people that get fruit from you guys. I think Lori is just wondering how you get the pick of those blocks and how that situation works for, Costa Brown, let's say, or.
Yeah, the way we do it here, I mean, we have 3 different clones, 3 different root stocks. The vineyard, as we've discussed, gives different kind of ripening curves and all that. We're very much invested in our winery clients making the best wine possible. So it wouldn't be in our long-term interest to be like, you get the tough ripening block at the bottom of the hill. So we work really hard actually to section off the vineyard row by row and try to give people, as many spices on the spice rack as far as vineyard location and clonal variation go from around the vineyard. And it's a little bit of a Tetris game sometimes to piece together blocks, especially if like clients are changing. One client wants less fruit, one client wants more. Maybe we're bringing in a new client, or a client's dropping out, and so you kind of have to reshuffle the chessboard a little bit. But generally, we try to lock people in for at least 3 years, and then they get to get familiarity with their rows too. They know when, the winemakers or the interns, whoever come out and sample fruit, like, I'm going to the south side, rows 43 to 51. It's 0.7 acres. This is my block. This is what I'm paying attention to. This is what I'm going to give feedback to Alex on if I see something viticulturally that I don't like. This is the fruit that I'm getting for this wine. And so we do as much custom farming as we can, although we definitely retain sort of final call on what we want to do for the sprays or the cultural practices or any of that. And then the wineries, though, retain the right to pick calls. And we also choose, and it takes a while to get there, and it's a lot of trust, and you definitely have to be rowing in the same direction. But we also sell the vineyard by the acre, not by the ton. And that kind of allows the grower, us, and the winery, the client, to be a little bit more in line with quality. If they think that it's cropped way too high, and I think that it's cropped appropriately, if they want the fruit off, I can take the fruit off and not feel like I'm just like putting dollar bills on the ground. Because like if you're selling the fruit by the ton, if you're selling it by volume, then you as a farmer, if you're thinning fruit, your client wants less fruit because I think it's higher quality. I'm like, well, that's literally, my payday out there. I don't want to cut the fruit off. But if you sell it by the acre, you're like, you want the fruit cut off? I'll cut the fruit off for you. And so selling by the acre, takes a lot of trust. You usually have to build into that relationship. But little things like that, now we're both aligned in quality. And if you think that's better for quality, it's not going to cost me any money. My revenue is a little bit more guaranteed, and their revenue is a little bit more guaranteed too. And, if we thin too much fruit and they don't get as much, they're kind of aware of that. And if they think the vineyard can handle it and they want to hang a little bit more fruit, their costs can potentially go down a little bit, if they yield a little bit more fruit. So it's a good way to sort of share risk and share reward.
Yeah, and just second to last question, obviously there are fires up that way, and just wondering, Lori is wondering about just smoke taint. how you guys protected yourself. Did you guys protect yourself, et cetera?
Yeah, so there was fires here and there and there and there and there. I mean, anybody who has especially lived in California or read the news, I mean, there were fires all up and down the state in 2020 with that lightning storm that we had. I mean, San Francisco was literally surrounded, you know, North Bay, East Bay, South Bay, Santa Cruz Mountains. And then the most dramatic thing in 2020 compared to other years was the timing of it. Peak fire season is usually kind of the end of September into October, and most of the Pinot Noir and the whites are kind of off the vine already. And so nobody likes the dark skies or the power outages or anything like that. But from a fruit standpoint, we're kind of in the clear. The Cabernet growers can deal with that. But in 2020, with the fires breaking out with that freak lightning storm that we experienced in August, and them just being so widespread, everybody was on the vine. So it was definitely challenging. Our proximity to the coast, I think, protected us a little bit. We have fresh air coming in off the coast, and then a lot of research has gone into how dangerous is the smoke in the vineyard and at what time. And what they're finding is that fresh smoke is the worst, and that the volatile phenols that grab onto the grapes dissipate in the air pretty quickly, typically within 24 hours. So if you're getting smoke on your vineyard that is 24 hours or less from the fire zone, that's your biggest danger zone. But just because the air quality is terrible, and you look outside and you can't see the trees across the way, if it's just old smoke kind of hanging around, it's not going to be a problem. This is kind of a lot of background just to say we hedged ourselves a little bit. We brought in about 60% of the Pinot that we intended. I have a ranch farther north, closer to the fire line, that we're a little bit less optimistic about. We have our ranch farther south, closest to the ocean, closest to the gap, farthest from the fires, that I'm most optimistic about. Kanzler is kind of in between. So I'm optimistic about the wines right now, tasting them. There's more tools coming out every day, viticulturally and the winemaking side of things, in order to help us overcome this challenge. What I can say unequivocally is that Kanzler and the other wineries that y'all know and love, nobody's going to put a bad product into bottle and just sort of cross their fingers. We're in this for the long haul. We, myself, and my peers, and the other premium wineries that you guys know and love, like, everybody's reputation is on the line. Everybody, has spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears building up, their brand, their customer base, their loyalty, their restaurant relationships, et cetera. So I think that, all the premium wineries out there that folks know, including us, if we put it into bottle, you're going to be able to rely on it. And that's what it's going to be at the end of the day. And that's kind of where we're hanging our hat. I'll throw one other anecdote at you right now. We had a new client in the vineyard in 2020. I can't say who it is at this point, but it is a winemaker who's got a label. He's a household name. He's been in the game a really, really long time. And that winemaker, first year in the vineyard in 2020, he wants a vineyard designated. So he's like super bullish on it. And this is a guy he would be a household name if you're into the Pinot Noir world at all. So we're super stoked about that. Me as a younger winemaker, I'm like, well, shoot, if he feels that way about it, that's a really big thumbs up. That's a sign in the positive direction. So again, we're not sold on exactly what we're going to bottle or how much. The SKU lineup has the potential to change a little bit. But again, for us and for all of the California wineries that everybody knows and loves, like, if you've trusted the producer to this point, you're going to be able to trust them going forward, and nobody's going to try to pull a fast one on you with the 2020 vintage. It's just not worth it for people's businesses.
Yeah, I think that sort of wraps it up. Wayne just says, yeah, he's been a big fan of the fruit that Costa Brown has gotten, your fruit that Costa Brown makes. And so he's really excited and he's thought this is really good to learn about your wine. Can't wait to drink more.
Do those. You always got to do it side by side, and do it blind side by side if you really want to, see what's up and what's down. Single blind is always the toughest thing. Somebody just said, how's Brianna feeling? She's doing good. Brianna she was supposed to join us today. She's been a little under the weather, but she's going to turn the corner here real fast. And we're a four-person team, so. We always feel it when somebody's not at 100%, but we're all kind of rallied around each other. And Bree will be back. Fear not.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that takes us to the end. You know, Alex, wow, amazing. What a great thing that we could do this year is create like a very intimate experience to learn about your terrific wines and your awesome vineyard.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, what a great treat for everyone. I feel bad for everyone else that didn't get a chance to participate, but oh well, we win. Good job, us.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next year in person.
Yeah, next year in person, and definitely more than a day. I don't care what the excuse is. You have to stay, and the after parties and everyone involved. If you have to be.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to do too much arm twisting to get people to Santa Barbara. I mean, I guess I can do it, right?
Right. Exactly. So yeah, we'll be back next year in person. But few things I want to mention. I put it up in the chat before. Is that Kanzler has an amazing auction lot that's going to be closing this Sunday. If you don't happen to get into that 1.5 liter of amazing wine, which I know that some people on my team are going for really hard, so good luck. You can go to theworldofpinotnoir.com. Just click on auction. I put the link in the chat. I've also put Kanzler's website in there, which he had mentioned. If you're ever going to stay up there, that house is amazing. I want to do a cannonball off that diving board. But again, if you don't happen to get to that Kanzler bid, there's going to be another auction lot that opens up for the last week of March. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities to score some killer wine. But if I were you guys, I would recommend that 1.5 liter that they put up there. And with that, I think that we're going to close out and wish everybody a happy Friday and happy World of Pinot Noir month. And Alex, again, such a treat to hang out with you. And thanks for taking the charge here and your whole team.
Yeah,
cheers.
It was a pleasure, and I hope everybody got something out of it. And next year in person. So thanks for having me.
Cheers. Bye, everyone. Happy weekend.